Good morning. I would like to start by acknowledging the Kaurna people on whose land we meet on. I pay my respects to elders of the past, present and future, and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people here today. Happy World Water Day. Welcome to this morning's breakfast hosted by the AWA and the Water Industry Alliance. My name is Victor Cantone and I chair the SA branch of the AWA. And I'm also the section executive for WSP here in Adelaide, one of the sponsors of this morning's event. It's wonderful to be in such great company and see so many of you here today from the water sector. We would also like to acknowledge the support of our principal members listed on the screen, both from the AWA and the Water Industry Alliance. This year's theme for World Water Day is leaving no one behind. This means that whoever you are, wherever you are, water is your human right. But today, billions of people are still living without water. Their households, schools, workplaces, farms and factories are struggling to survive and thrive. At WSP, we believe that we must hold all ourselves accountable for tomorrow, and this includes providing sustainable water for all. We have a strong local team here in Adelaide, but we also have the benefit of drawing on the brainpower of 48,000 experts globally in future-proofing our cities and environments for communities to thrive. WSP is also a long-standing partner of WaterAid. This year, members from our team across Australia celebrated World Water Day by raising over $7,000 for their Walk for Water challenge and walked in solidarity with those who need to walk long distances to collect water every day. It is not too late to donate to our team or to one of the other participants if you haven't already. We are very privileged to have safe and reliable access to clean water, and we look forward to hearing the diversity of thought from our guest speaker and challenging us and our industry on how we can do better. Before we start the presentations, I invite Elsie up to do some of the housekeeping. Thanks, Elsie.
Thanks very much, Victor. My name's Elsie Mann. I'm Vice Chair of the State Committee Branch for AWA. So welcome also. I'd like to say a big thank you to our sponsors. So we have WSP, who you've just heard from, as our event sponsor, and then we also have a video sponsor in the Murray-Darling Basin Authority. The support of our sponsors helps us deliver these events and share them with a broader audience, so thank you very much. As Victor mentioned, the theme for World Water Day this year is leaving no one behind. This is an adaptation of the main theme, the promise for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It represents an acknowledgement that as sustainable development progresses, we want everyone to benefit. Sustainable Development Goal number 6 on water includes a target to ensure availability and sustainable management of water for everyone. Drivers of this goal include the billions of people that are living without safe water and the fact that marginalised groups are often overlooked or face discrimination as they try to access safe water. While it's not difficult to see the relevance of the Sustainable Development Goals globally, when we were putting together this event, we really wanted to be able to explore the relevance of today's theme here in Australia. So I would like to move on and welcome Ciara Sterling, Director and CEO of Thriving Communities Partnership and Head of Community Inclusion at Yarra Valley Water. As the Director and CEO of the Thriving Communities Partnership, Ciara leads a cross-sectional collaboration of organisations tackling the root cause of hardship and inequality. She collaborates widely across corporate, government and community sectors to design and deliver innovative shared value programs. This is supported by over 20 years of experience working across these sectors, addressing issues around hardship and vulnerability. As Head of Inclusion at Yarra Valley Water, Ciara has been an industry leader in supporting customers experience vulnerability, hardship and family violence through Yarra Valley's Water Care initiative. In 2016-17, Ciara led the water industry's response to the Victorian Royal Commission into Family Violence. This included working with the ESC to update the industry's code and developing detailed guidance to help water businesses implement programs that support customers and staff members experiencing family violence. By raising the awareness of the industry's innovative approach to inclusion, vulnerability and hardship and family violence, Ciara promotes our sector as a leader in tackling these issues, and as such was awarded the Australian Water Association of the Year 2018 Water Professional of the Year. We are really excited to have Ciara join us as a guest speaker today, so please join me in welcoming Ciara.
I would also like to take a moment to thank the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. When we talk about no one being left behind, I think that's a part of our community that's probably in a really high instance of suffering. We know that life expectancy for our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities is actually lower. We know there are greater health issues and really strong access issues to the services within this country, which is the land in which they've been living in for much longer than most of us. So I think it's always good to reflect on the communities that started this land. They're also exceptionally connected to water. So when you look at where communities were living, it was always along those waterways, because water is such an integral and critical part of our community and our life force. So I have worked in water for over 20 years. Clearly I like it. I think in the water space, when you're looking at, again, this no one being left behind, I think often we do think about the work that's happening internationally. I saw Rock and Caroline here today. We went to Timor-Leste with WaterAid a number of years ago and got to see firsthand how important water is to a community. I think often in a first world country you take it a bit for granted, don't you? You turn on a tap, there's water. You flush a toilet, it goes away, which we don't like to think about necessarily where it goes to. Us in the water industry do, because we talk about poo and wee all the time. But the community itself maybe doesn't think about that so much. And we were chatting, Elsie and Jess and I caught up yesterday, and we were talking about the fact that one of the things that struck me when we were in Timor-Leste was that the work that was being done by WaterAid to put really safe water and sanitation in place in those countries was addressing the issues that you expect it to address. So, health and saving those lives of children. So the things that you think about. But what we didn't expect to see, I think, when we were over there, and probably what struck me and I think a couple of others that were over there with me, was the actual change to society that occurred when you enabled access to water and sanitation services. Things like, and we talk about this a lot, especially in Australia at the moment, family violence and economic abuse and the things that the diversity barriers and gender diversity barriers. And what we saw when we were in Timor-Leste was that because women were made such a part of that decision-making process, so women were usually the ones who had to walk many hours to access safe water and bring it back, which meant the female daughters weren't going to school. The women weren't being able to do anything other than collect that water. So when WaterAid went in to look at co-designing solutions with community, women were front and centre at that table. Now that's something that community hadn't seen so much before. So by doing that, and by women being put in charge of the maintenance of the pumps, they were very strongly involved in the consultation process and leaders in driving those changes in those villages. All of a sudden their position was elevated and they were seen as really, really important parts of their community. And having safe water also meant that they could now run their own businesses and that these young women could go to school. So I think when we think about water here, we don't necessarily think about it from that context of how critical it is to life. I mean, it's the most essential of essential services, and that's how we talk about it. But even here in this country, what makes me very, very sad is that there are barriers to accessing our essential services. So we know that people with disabilities are 20% more likely to have issues with poverty. So 20% of our disabled community that are highly disabled are living in long-term poverty. We know that there are issues in our society like family violence. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 17 men experience that. We know that unfortunately, because of economic abuse, our industry, the water industry, is being used as a weapon. So perpetrators of violence are weaponising debt to trap someone in their circumstances, and it is a gendered issue, so I talk about it from a gendered lens. So predominantly what we see is that it is a gendered issue in this country. So we do see perpetrators ringing up and putting debt in their partner's name or holding them to that property, or in fact ringing our companies and saying, Oh, now I popped the forwarding address in. What forwarding address did I give you? Oh, 12 Smith Street. Yeah, that's right. And what the Royal Commission in Victoria showed us was that they were using that information to go and find the victims and to contribute constant and more abuse over that time. So water, I think when you start, I talk a lot about when I started in this industry, I didn't really know where it was going to go for me. I didn't expect to be doing things around poverty and disability and family violence. I didn't expect to be working really, really closely with multicultural communities because I was thinking you turn on the tap and that's what water is. So what we know in this country is because of some of these diversities that we face. So there's about 25% of our country who speak a language other than English. My colleague Gabby and I last night went to a fabulous dinner. A colleague of mine runs Welcome to Australia, which is an organisation across Australia that welcomes new communities in. And it creates a space where if someone's coming to our country and they're new, like a family last night who had only been here 2 days, they come into this community house and it's like, hey, how about we take you down to the bank and show you how to open a bank account? Let's walk to the library and show you where that is. So it's about creating this beautiful community space. And we were kindly invited to the community dinner last night where we got to speak to so many different people and from so many different places to understand, I guess, some of those complexities that they face. Again, when you're landing in a new country, just things like opening up a bank account is really complex. And if you don't have somebody to assist you with that in this country, banking is an essential service. So if you don't have access to those bank accounts, you don't have access to welfare systems, you don't have access to pay bills. So these are the things that I don't think are really front of mind often when we're living our day-to-day lives. We also know that age is a barrier. I mean, I think as I get older, there's all these different, age brackets when you tick the boxes, and then there's people talk a lot about, over 60s, and I was like, years ago going, over 60s, phew, it's a while away. Now I'm like, oh, okay, right, I'm heading really close towards that box. And they talk about, I was at we had Thriving Communities Partnership had the head of vulnerability from Lloyds Bank out this week talking to the banking industry and other industries about what they're doing in the space of working with consumers experiencing vulnerability. And they were saying people over the age of 65 in the UK, about 80% of people over the age of 65 are not really digitally included. And 30% of those were saying, it doesn't matter what you do, we're never going to get on board with that. And I was like, that's not far away from the box I'm ticking. And I found that really surprising. So that we know that in the digital world, if you're not actually digitally included, it's actually cutting you out of a whole lot of different things. What I've also learnt this week is those who are not using the digital landscape are twice as likely to not be saving and twice as likely to get in trouble financially, because most things are digital these days. There's all these different complexities that we face as a community. There's all these different vulnerabilities. We talk about vulnerability, and Rebecca and I were talking about it outside. Vulnerability is a big catch-all. But the thing is, 50% of us are vulnerable in this room right now if one thing happens. One thing changes. We're not a society that necessarily lives to our means. A very large portion of our community does not have decent savings. So if you were to lose your job tomorrow, the majority of our community say they would struggle within the next 8 weeks. And when you do lose your job, especially as you're ageing, trying to get a job very quickly at the same level that you were at, very, very difficult. So we know that age is actually a factor. We know that employment is a factor. We know that disability is a factor. I myself have old trusty walking stick. I have Ross River, and it goes dormant, it comes back, it goes dormant, it comes back. My trusty walking stick has been with me since September. I'm ready for it to go dormant again. And what I've found through, I've worked in the space of people experiencing vulnerability for 20 years, and even I sometimes forget. Turns out, just in case you're experiencing disability, Australia's not so great with accessibility. There are still many buildings that do not have lifts. Sydney loves stairs. Everywhere, even in the streets, like it's a footpath. I don't understand why we're going up and down stairs in a footpath. Just, casually leave it straight. And I think I happen to, luckily, be the CEO of the company I work for, so have a little bit more control over the conditions. But imagine, so it's been since September, so 6 odd months where I haven't been able to drive a car. which in most industries is really quite debilitating. I do a lot of travel, but that can be quite tricky. So I think, imagine if I was in an industry where some of the barriers that I'm now facing made it, in the eyes of my employer, much more difficult to do my job. Now, I can get on a plane every other day. I do find transport to the different meetings I have to go to. But as an employer, when they're thinking about who they're hiring, are they going to see that as a barrier where they're not going to want to participate? What we know is that people who are suffering disabilities, where they suffer a disability at some point in their life, and that actually impairs them for more than 3 months, most employers will reconsider their employment as a result of that. Now, we all know that under laws, these are things we can't do, but unfortunately there's lots of ways to get around that. So you think about your life and those times in your life where something goes wrong, a death in the family. What we know about bereavement is it causes a substantial trauma. You know, if you have a sick family member and a child, for example, and they go into hospital, and you are a parent of that child and you're a two-job family, one of you may have to give up that job to go spend time at the hospital. If you're not close to a hospital, there's a lot of travel time and travel costs. The stress, you're not sleeping, even if you're turning up to work, you're certainly not as engaged as you once were. So the health side of that stuff is having a huge impact on our community. And then when somebody passes away, exceptional trauma. What we've found, there was a report that came out from the Council of the Ageing that said, in actual fact, we're really bad at it. So when somebody passes away and you call the service provider, the experience is usually pretty hideous. You need this form and this process and that process. And the person has to call up multiple times and re-traumatise themselves every time they do. So our friend from Lloyds Bank was telling us how the entire of Lloyds Bank had a huge change. And the thing that sparked that was that one of their executive teams had someone pass away, and they tried to make contact with their own organisation and found the process appalling. Often, when we have big changes in our organisation, it is driven from the top down. I think if I look back over my life in this industry and the many industries I've worked in, and I look at how we thought about vulnerabilities, even 5 years ago, very different. In Victoria at the moment, all water and energy providers are now being required to have policies around family violence. Their staff are required to be trained in that. Businesses are required to have processes and policies for their staff. That's a huge shift. And the water industry was the first industry to start making this change. Businesses are now required to have policies to support people experiencing different vulnerabilities and hardships, because the reality is, in our country that we live in, for it to be sustainable and safe, we actually need our community to be sustainable and safe. So as organisations, we actually have an exceptionally big responsibility. In water, I believe we have a duty of care. So a lot of people talk about your social licence to operate. So there's your social licence to operate, which is a really important thing for major companies across this country, but there's also a duty of care. At Thriving Communities Partnership, my major partners are the major banks and energy companies and telcos and water companies and the major community organisations in this country and government. And our job is to bring everybody together to look at the really tricky, complex stuff. And leave no one behind is at the centre of that complex stuff, because we are leaving so many people behind. And so as a society, we've seen this real shift where businesses started to go, oh, actually, if that customer's having difficulty paying and I'm spending hundreds of dollars on chasing them for debt and they don't actually have hundreds of dollars, so something doesn't quite fit right here, it doesn't quite make sense. So imagine a world where someone's in difficulty, they contact your organisation and you say, oh, you don't have to fill out 112 forms and tell me your life story and give me your second child. If you just say that something's going on for you, I'm going to believe you. I know, shocking. Who would have thought? Believing people. So these things seem a bit crazy, right? Because you're going, well, you've got a business to run. And so one of our major banks in this country, NAB, did exactly that. So they used to have a process where it was 21 days to put in an application if you're in difficulty. 21 days. of processing and forms, and when someone's in crisis, anyone who's experienced something, that your bandwidth is like this. You're going from, I might be exceptionally capable here, but when something's going on for you, all of a sudden, just getting out of bed can be hard enough. So you're filling out your hundreds of thousands of forms that are really complex. And what they found was, it was actually costing them a truckload of money. And that process was creating this negative customer experience and breaking loyalty and trust, because they're like, okay, you don't want to listen to me and trust me, but yet you expect me to trust you as a big organisation. So they went through a process of saying, rather than having a credit team, why don't we get rid of all debt collection and credit and just have an assistance team? Why don't we just have a team that assists people? And why don't, oh my goodness, we just believe what they tell us? So their process went from 21 days to 12 minutes. As a result of that change in their business, and they're a bank, they're pretty big. And I know if you glance at the newspapers, we're not seeing any much love coming out of the banking system at the moment. But these are the stories that we don't hear. It's actually saving them, on average, of $70 million a year to believe people and treat them like humans. Who would have thought? They're a bank, and there's been that little thing, the Royal Commission, on the TV every single day for the last 18 months. And they may or may not have lost a CEO and a chair. However, they've had 0 complaints in relation to financial hardship in the past 3 to 6 months. So that is a pretty big ticket item to say, hold on a sec, as a society, maybe we need to change our thinking. Maybe we need to stop assuming people aren't telling us the truth, or stop seeing a vulnerable customer, a vulnerable human. Because you know what? It's actually not about being a vulnerable human. It's about something in your life causing a vulnerability, an experience, a circumstance. It doesn't define us. I work a lot in the family violence space, and I work with a lot of survivor advocates, and that is exactly what they're talking about. This does not define me. This stick does not define me. Although I did go to an airport recently, and I get it, I must look quite dodgy because the drug testers love me, drug and bomb testing every single time. And the gentleman goes, what'd you do to yourself? I said, I've got Ross River fever. Oh, well, I hope you're not bloody contagious. Like, yes, no, I am, very much so. So I thought I'd come to a major national airport with that contagious disease. And I may have said to him, if I was a big mosquito and I bit you, I'd be contagious, but because I'm not a mosquito, you're going to be fine. But even that, he did physically repel when I said I had an illness. And I think in society we start, we're doing a lot of work in the space of cognitive disability. So people who have cognitive issues, dementia, old age, acquired brain injuries. And I think when we work with people with a disability or a cognitive disability, often we see, and we've talked a lot about this, that people will speak to the carer, right? So often, even if I am lucky enough to be the CEO of this organisation, and I was with a colleague of mine, a male colleague of mine, and people were talking to him and not me, I can still hear, I can still talk. In fact, this is all okay. It's just an old man-looking stick that I've got over here. And this is what people with cognitive disability and disabilities are saying. People aren't speaking to them directly. Because often you're a bit scared, you don't really know if you're going to say something wrong, or you don't know if they can understand you. But what the people that we work with every day say is, just give it a crack. Just have a conversation with me. And if I can't understand it, I've got a carer who can support me. The way we run our businesses is for a very vanilla scope of a human. But I tell you what, I just don't think I've seen a vanilla person in a really long time. So we need to start thinking about, the power of diversity. When we're talking about leaving no one behind, actually, the power of diversity is amazing. When you bring different minds and different thoughts and different views into a room, the things you can do are amazing. They are game-changing. When you have the same version of you sitting around a table chatting, guess what? You get one very, very, very narrow view. I think as a society, we've got to start embracing these differences, and we talk about it a lot, but we actually have to start doing it, and we have to start changing our practices. If you write a contract that your 11-year-old child or your 5-year-old child can't understand, a very large portion of the community we live in can't understand it. Lloyds Bank was saying the average reading age for the UK is 11. And that's the average reading age. So we actually need to start thinking about what we're saying to people and how we're saying these things. You know, if you've got an IVR on your phone and someone's got an acquired brain injury and their speech is impaired, the IVR can't understand them. Can you imagine that? I mean, can you imagine? I mean, who loves an IVR anyway? You know, I've sat on the phone to many organisations for many hours. 7. Customer service. And usually I have relatively comfortable speaking voice. So imagine if you had a speaking impairment, what that must feel like. Imagine getting your bill and not being able to understand it. And again, sometimes with my utility bills, I don't. So if every day we start thinking about not just what we would be thinking, but what the person standing next to us or the person standing next to them might need, what a nicer place we'll live in. One of the gentlemen last night was saying to me, obviously what's happened in Christchurch is horrific. And he was saying to me, you know, it's funny because every single one of us, when we cry, water comes out our eyes, tears come out our eyes. And when we smile, our lips come out, and if we get cut, we bleed. And we all have this beating heart. But yet, we see ourselves as really different. The reality is, we have way more things that make us the same than that make us different. But sometimes we only focus on the different bits, and we don't focus on a good way. We need to start thinking about those differences as being fantastic, but at the core of it, we're just humans doing what humans do. Whether we're from a different culture, whether we have a different background, whether we follow a different religion, whether we have impairments, if we can see, if we can hear, if we can walk, whether we experience crisis, if we lose somebody, if somebody hurts us and we are a victim of that. At the end of the day, what we are humans. And to have a society that can be strong. I went over to Detroit a few years ago and I saw a lot, you know, I went to Timor where you imagine you're going to be traumatised, sometimes by what you see. But actually, I was way more traumatised in Detroit. Because what I saw in Detroit was a society that didn't stand for each other. They didn't support each other. In Detroit, you can have your water cut off. You can't do that in this country. And I saw large areas of water being cut off in Black and Hispanic areas. They were trying to bring more business into the Detroit area. They were trying to change who was coming into the Detroit area. And they did it by cutting off water, under the guise of people not being able to afford to pay it. So when you see a society like that and you see what happens in a construct of that society, I walked down the street and there were cars on fire. This side of the street there were mansions, this side of the street there were shacks. And this is in a first world country. This is not who we are going to be in this country. We are diverse. We are strong. We are committed to doing well in this country. And that is what we need to keep reminding ourselves. We should never, ever, ever let anybody be left behind, because one day that somebody could be us, or our parents, or our children, or our friend. So let's just not let it happen. Let's make sure in the front of our mind every day we are creating a society that is inclusive. And in an industry like this, where we are fundamental to life, we have a greater responsibility to do so. And I think, because I've worked in this industry for so long, in fact I know, we are up for that challenge. So I challenge every single one of you, embrace that diversity, speak to people you don't know, engage with people who have had experiences that you haven't had. And in your organisations, if you're making change for someone, make sure they are involved in that change. If you are creating policies around disability, have people with disability in that discussion. Sure, there are great consultants out there, but if you are not using lived experience, then you are not creating pathways for people that are for people. That's me done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ciara. I think you provided us with so much food for thought. I'm looking forward to hearing the ensuing discussion, but we did want to provide an opportunity if anyone had any questions for Ciara before we close up for the morning. Is there any questions? We have a mic, yep.
Thank you. Neil Palmer from Tonkin Consulting. Thank you for an excellent presentation and a very challenging one. My question is, when you deal with people who are struggling, how do you help them without reinforcing their sense of victimhood?
Yeah, look, this is such a good question. This comes up a lot. It's about giving people agency. So what we can do is create an enabling environment. So we can do things like have more accessible workplaces, we can have different types of payment plans, we can have access to support services, but we also give people choice and control over that. I think one of the things that there's this real tension between, you know, doing the right thing and then being a bit controlling and paternal, that risk of taking away someone's power. So the main thing is everyone deserves to have their own agency. Everyone deserves to have that choice, but let's create an environment that enables that. You know, people talk a lot about, oh, we're going to empower people. It's like, here's the thing about empowerment. You actually can't empower somebody else. They can only empower themselves. But what we can do is create an environment that enables that to happen without creating this and just being there. If someone's putting their hand up to say they need assistance, then that's great. What we don't want to do, and this happens a lot, I guess, in the family violence space, where someone thinks things are going on, well, they need to do something, I'm going to intervene. You know what? It takes on average 7 times for someone to leave a family violence situation, and it will only be successful when they're ready to do it because their life is at risk in most of those cases. And you know what? We never actually know what's going on in someone's head. So it's about having an enabling environment, but giving people choice and agency to make their own decisions.
Hi, I'm Jodie Ann. Just a quick question, just following on from that question, is that how do people know that services are available to them in a world where, as you said, our digital literacy is lacking for some people, and they might not have access to services? How do we actually get through to people that there are options for them?
So this is our biggest problem at the moment. Alderman does a trust barometer, and what it's showing us is that community trust in organisations and government is exceptionally low, and exceptionally low for Australia. There is no trust. So if people don't trust their organisations, guess what? They're not going to go and ask them for help. When we talked about that 50%, there's a pyramid that looks at about 50% of people being financially vulnerable. 13% are exceptionally high and severe financial vulnerability and stress at the moment, and less than 1% are accessing support programs. So there's 12% of our community that are desperately in need and not accessing it. And the biggest barriers are they don't know, because we don't talk about it, and pride and embarrassment. Like, I look at my dad, I'm Irish, you can tell if you've seen the spelling of my name, there's a lot of vowels. He would never, ever put his hand up for support, because that's you did not talk about your business in the Irish family. It's your business, you don't talk about it. So I think part of what we need to do is have these conversations. Every single bank in Australia has a hardship program, has a family violence program, has support programs, has accessibility plans. Every water company is looking at things like vulnerability and hardship programs, so they exist. But we have to start talking about them. One of the things I struggle with a bit is the media. We only ever hear the bad stories. And while we have things like royal commissions, which are definitely needed, but while we have these constant negative stories, no one's talking about the fact that, you know, if you ring up your service provider, you will be helped. We are here to support you. But no one's talking about that. So part of what we're looking at, one of my colleagues that we met with down here, we were talking about how do we create an advocacy campaign where we're saying, you can go to people if you need assistance. Stuff is available to you. So it's how do we get the word out? And it's stuff like this, talking about the fact that organisations do offer support. And getting that word out that way, because the biggest barrier is no one knowing, and they don't trust us. So even if they know, they're not actually stepping up and asking for that help. So better we behave, the more we do, the more we publicise stuff, the more we have very, very loud and proud plans on how we're going to do stuff, and we're showing it and we're living it, the more people will start to trust us and believe us, and then they're going to come through and ask for that support when they need it.
Thank you so much, Ciara. There will be... I think there will be a little bit of time before people need to head off to the offices if you have any further questions, so feel free. I would like to just now invite Robin Cock, who's Acting Chief Executive and Board Chair of the Water Industry Alliance, to provide some closing remarks.
So as Elsie and Victor mentioned about World Water Day and what it's really about today, if you haven't jumped on the UN World Water Day website, I encourage you to do that. It is about leaving no one behind, and particularly around those marginalised and Indigenous communities around the world. We're very, very privileged, particularly in metropolitan cities in Australia, how we are. And it was really terrific to hear from Ciara about some of those experiences that she sees and around the place. And the story about Detroit was quite eye-opening, to be honest. So once again, thanks Ciara, and thanks everyone for coming, and we hope you enjoy World Water Day, and if you're going to the WaterAid Lawn Bowls event tonight, we'll see you there again. Thank you. Cheers.